focused. And I know that, okay, first of all, full disclosure, my husband is a congregational rabbi, has been in his current congregation for 36 years, faces the same, and I as face the same challenges that you do about keeping a vibrant congregation, if you're in a congregation, keeping a congregation vibrant, ensuring membership, balancing the books, etc. This is going to be controversial, because what we're saying is Jewish education can't be about the needs of the congregations and the institutions. We really need to be focusing on the learners, their needs, the reality of where they are at, because as wonderful as what we provide is, they're voting with their feet. There's a significant population who's saying, stand on your head, do whatever you want. We're not coming. We're not joiners. What you're offering isn't the way in for us. Interestingly, when Deborah and I and my other colleagues have worked in communities, contrary to the stereotype, these people are not saying we are anti-Judaism. They want Judaism, as we said earlier, on their terms, and they want it to be consistent with how they're thinking about it. And they are open to learning and to change, but they need to come in where they're at. So it needs to be learner-focused. And learner-focused also in terms of learning needs. Not everybody learns in the same way. And so we need to focus on making the match between those who learn better intellectually and logically, and those who use the left side of the brain, and those who need to learn kinesthetically. We just really need to focus on that. Secondly, it's relationship-based. It's based on, good education is based on the relationship that we build among our fellow learners. There is nothing more powerful to me as a way of connecting, as learning with somebody. Whether it's in Chavruta or in a class, there is a relationship between the educational leader, the coach, the teacher, and the learner. It needs to be based on relationships between the learning situation and the rest of life, which we'll get to in a moment, and between families. And we've got to acknowledge that. We especially have to acknowledge that with our teen population, it's all about relationships, and also with younger people and with their families. Because if their families are engaged in the relationship, and it's not totally about the content, then we have a chance of getting at them. It needs to be life-centered. We may know that it's relevant. Somehow it has to be blatantly relevant to their lives, to their passions, to the things that they do every day, not to that little corner segment of the Jewishness. And it needs to be community-centric. We are missing out on power that we have if we continue to operate in our individual subatomic particles that aren't connected as a molecule. Or a different metaphor, which I'm going to talk about in a second, in our individual nodes, when we don't acknowledge that really we live in an ecosystem. Think about it. We live in an educational and a community ecosystem. So, what will it take to create powerful, life-centered education? Well, we need to expand the venues and the settings. We need to broaden the modes. We need to expand the scope through strengthening connections among pathways and multiple settings. We need to see people on a journey and not stuck. Once they get in one door, to be there. We've got to connect year-round experiences, summer experiences through the year. We need to connect fantastic Jewish early childhood experiences for the children and their families and help them find the right path as they move forward, which many do not. They get stuck and they don't go beyond. So how do we move them on? We need to recruit and retain the right people. Not only professionals, we need to really think long and hard about how do we create lay volunteer leadership who will be the advocates. I've been talking to a number of people, the alpha mom and dads, you know, the ones who know which the right stroller is, where the right gymboree group is, and they bring their friends with them. We need to cultivate them to bring the group around. We need to respect and support educators' professionalism. We need to foster opportunities for collaboration among educators, because we know from the literature on innovation that innovation doesn't happen by a solitary experimenter in a little lab, but by the cross-pollination of ideas. We need to create a culture of innovation, that there's always an opportunity to do something new, not just for the sake of doing something new, but because it advances what we're doing and where we want to go. And we need to incorporate best practices, not only from within the Jewish world, but from beyond as well. So, what will it take to create the Jewish education ecosystem for a vibrant Jewish future? So what am I talking about when I'm talking about an ecosystem? I am not a biologist or a botanist, let me make that totally clear, but I'm doing a lot of reading on ecosystems, and what I understand is that there are a number of elements. There are the nodes, the subgroups and the individuals that live within or reside within an ecosystem. There are the interconnections between them, and there are the processes or forces that affect the entire ecosystem, like the water cycle, like gravity. And so we need to be thinking, not only as we have been in the past, about the individual nodes, but we've got to think about the rest of the ecosystem and harness that power. Sometimes we may not be able to actually have an impact on it. We just have to understand, as we started earlier, what's going on around us. So when I came up with this idea, I thought I discovered America. I thought I was so brilliant in coming up with this metaphor. And yet, I remembered that in my graduate school, I learned from Lawrence Kremen, who was the president of Teachers College, and he talked about an ecosystem for education, or an edu-system. And he, in the 70s, was saying that the school-centered approach was limited and we should be thinking about the community approach to education. And that's what WOW's about. So what would kind of an ecosystem here would produce powerful, life-centered Jewish education, pulling together the things? Well, it needs to meet the learners and families' real needs. Educational, spiritual, and practical. It has to have experiential and enjoyable experiences. It needs to blend formal and informal. At least that's what we're hearing in the other communities where we're working. It needs to build connection and community across generations, organizations, institutions. It needs to be guided by professionals and at the same time shaped by the interests of the learners. It needs to take place in a variety of venues, not within four walls. It needs to take full advantage of the power and potential of technology because it is ubiquitous. And it needs to comprise a continuous educational system where we aren't thinking only about this moment, but we're also thinking about the future. So visually, all kinds of venues. And what might Toronto's ecosystem look like? And this is not intended in any way to be a comprehensive list. It's just to kind of spark some ideas. So there need to be education programs specially designed to effectively engage hard-to-reach populations. I know you already have some of these. What can we do to expand, enrich, deepen, and to connect them with other forms of education? Maybe a cluster of magnet schools that address the passions of people, their general passions, arts, music, Hebrew language immersion, family learning, so that each institution doesn't have to try to do everything for everyone, but you work together and really focus in and be excellent in one area. And think about how groups of congregations or congregations and other entities can work together to create this. Just an idea. Retreats and other special programs, expanding the year. An after-school program, which I know you already have some of, but thinking again, really excellent. Families are paying for after-school programming. What if they could do one-stop shopping and get the Jewish and everything else all together? And it could be done every day. Family education. Post-B'nai Mitzvah, how to really engage that population. And what is implicit here is a concierge system. Because the more options that you have, and the more free market it is, the more families will need a guide to create almost IEPs for individuals within their family, for how to move, to understand, to know about. We were amazed yesterday about even the people in the know, because the community is so large and there's so many options, how people didn't even know about some of the existing programs that their colleagues were running. So what's the roadmap? Again, we talked about the goal. So we're using an approach in our WOW communities called appreciative inquiry, which is the opposite of saying, oy vey, we got a problem, we got to respond, but rather, we've got assets. And I hope I've communicated how aware we are, although we've only touched the tip of the iceberg, of the assets that Toronto has. That's why we're so excited in working with you. So how do we identify them? How do we magnify them? How do we connect them and build farther? So what are those assets? In discovery, which is the first phase of appreciative inquiry, that's what we do. More in a second. And then we move on to, if we understand what the assets are in the community, can we dream about how to engage and develop further? And then we design based on the dream. It's a great case of UBD, understanding by design or backward design. Once we understand where we want to go and what the pieces are, we can design programs. And then, this is not my term, destiny, it comes from the literature on appreciative inquiry, going where we're going. So in Toronto, we have a roadmap. We have gotten to an agreement to proceed. In this month, in February, we're doing what we call community organization. Deborah and I came here for a first date to get to know you, to tell you a little bit about ourselves, to begin to open the conversation and build trust. We're coming back in March, in which, when we are going to meet again with the professional and lay leaders within the communities in group interviews or conversations, but more importantly, with Amcha, with people who are in the system, parents and kids, people who have never been in the system. Will be identified actually by people who are in. Everybody knows somebody who is a neighbor, someone who is not participating. We want to talk to them. We want to talk about the people who were in and dropped out.